You're watching Reality Check. 3 days ago, the Indian Express, in its editorial on the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which is being debated in Parliament today as we speak live, said this. For the first time in India, citizenship will be defined for some men, women and children in religious terms. That is the terrible and terrifying burden of the Citizenship Bill. I agree with that view, but that's neither here nor there. The bill is now on its way to becoming law, and the only challenge to it has to be legal. So to understand whether the bill stands the legal and constitutional test in a court of law, we spoke to a range of legal luminaries, former judges, lawyers, legal scholars, scholars with an acknowledged understanding of the Constitution and constitutional law. We tried to select as broad a spectrum of voices as possible. We left out lawyers openly aligned to any political party. In all, we contacted 19 individuals, of which 9 agreed to speak to us. An overwhelming majority, 7, told us that the bill was indeed unconstitutional and will not stand legal scrutiny. Only one prominent lawyer believed the bill does not violate the Constitution, while another legal luminary said there are strong arguments on both sides. Before you hear from them directly, here is some context. The core of the legal challenge to the bill is likely to rest on whether it violates Article 14 of the Constitution, which says any person, regardless of race or religion, shall be treated equally before the law. But Article 14, as the Home Minister points out, does allow for reasonable classification, that exceptions can be made provided they are rational and not discriminatory. In the case of the bill, it seeks to grant citizenship to illegal migrants fleeing religious persecution, but it limits it to migrants from 6 non-Muslim religions from 3 neighboring countries, justifying the exclusion of Muslims with the argument that these are Muslim-majority countries. Is this classification reasonable, or does it amount to discrimination, was the question we posed. Here are those who believe that the bill is in fact discriminatory, starting with Justice Madan Lokur, former judge of the Supreme Court.
Everybody is entitled to the protection of Article 14. So therefore, if the Citizenship Amendment Bill takes out a particular category of people, it will have to be justified by the state.
Right.
Now, one of the things that has been said in the articles that I've read, it says that there's a reasonable classification between persons who belong to religion A and persons who do not belong to religion A.
This has been one of the justifications of the defense of the bill by the government.
Okay. So, I don't think that's a valid classification. It must be a rational classification which has an object, which has a nexus with the object sought to be achieved.
So, the unspoken assumption in this bill is that because these are Muslim majority countries, the reason why we're not extending protection to Muslims is that Muslims cannot be persecuted in Muslim majority countries. Does that hold?
Why not? Why can't Muslims be persecuted in their own country?
So that argument of saying that just because you're the majority religion of a country which has that religion as a state religion, you can't make the automatic assumption that you're not liable to be persecuted.
Yeah. You see, it's like this. The persecution may not necessarily be religious persecution.
Sure.
It could be persecution because of a political belief.
Right.
It could be persecution because of some other reason. So why are we assuming that because it is a state religion, therefore, as a result, there is persecution?
Right.
Persecution could be for some other reasons also. So even Muslims in Pakistan could be persecuted for their political beliefs.
Any classification based on religion or community or language, such like a thing, will never be a reasonable classification. If the classification is based on the individuals' need to have a different citizenship, it could be a reasonable classification. But it can't be confined to only those people who come from a particular community or a particular religion. In my opinion, that will not be a reasonable classification at all. You can refuse immigration to a particular member of a particular community if you have material to show that particular individual's presence in this country is likely to interfere with the internal security or the nation's security. Then they can refuse individually, not based on that he belongs to a particular religion. Therefore, in my opinion, any law which restricts the entry to India only to certain religious people on the ground of religion only will be contrary to the Indian Constitution, where India is a secular country, and any discrimination based on religion, caste or otherwise will be contrary to the Indian Constitution.
I don't think it's constitutional at all. Why should they exclude Muslims? It'd be against the Constitution provisions of equality. I think it's correct. And apart from that, it will send a very bad signal. They shouldn't do that. I don't know what the motivation is. But to exclude Muslims who are a sizable chunk of our community, of our society, I think there's no justifiable reason which will meet the test of constitutionality. It's the wrong signal. Wrong signal and again divisive. It's not in the interest of the community at all. I don't know who's advised him to do it, but I think they are very ill advised. I'm sure the bench, we have a strong constitution bench now in the Supreme Court. And in my opinion, in my humble opinion, it won't pass the test of constitutionality. More likely it'll be struck down.
When we look at the Constitution, the citizenship provisions came into being from 26 November 1949, prior to the rest of the provisions of the Constitution, which will come into play on 26 January 1950. So at that point of time also in the Constituent Assembly, there was quite a heated debate on citizenship. And after all the discussions, we decided to go by civic nationalism. There will be no religious qualification attached to the grant of citizenship. And therefore, I personally feel that the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which talks of only certain kinds of communities, is not compatible with the constitutional vision and the provisions of the Constitution. This amendment, by insisting on religious qualification, goes against the fundamental tenets of our Constitution. It is not just the question of secularism which is at stake. It is also the question of justice, and it is also question of equality and the question of liberty and liberalism. You know, we are becoming regressive by adopting this kind of provision. We are going in the direction of law of return of Israel, that Israel is the natural home of all Jews. In India, we thought anyone who is persecuted or anyone who wants to voluntarily come to India is welcome. So I would say, if we really want to help persecuted people in our neighborhood, first we have to include all the countries in the neighborhood. You cannot arbitrarily pick up few countries and exclude others. For instance, Myanmar was very much part of British India. How can we exclude Myanmar just because Rohingyas happen to be Muslims? We are saying you are not welcome.
This particular law basically provides that non-Muslim undocumented migrants from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh will get an accelerated path to citizenship in India. It leaves out, and the assumption is that these are persecuted groups in these countries. It leaves out a number of other persecuted groups in these countries, including Shias, Ahmadis, LGBT groups, atheists, and women. It also leaves out a large number of other countries in which people of Indian origin live and face persecution. And perhaps the most surprising absences are those of Tamils from Sri Lanka and groups in Burma, who we know have a documented case of this thing on them. Secondly, it fails an important test by using the category of religion to discriminate in the question of citizenship, something that our founders had expressly ruled out. And the Supreme Court has time and again held that secularism is an intrinsic part of basic structure, non-discrimination is a part of basic structure, and on the face of it, this would fail a test in these regards.
There are two things I'll point out to you, which suggest that this is a pretext. This is not a genuine justification. If the government was genuinely interested in protecting persecuted people from neighboring countries who are suffering because of their religious views, the protection will not simply be extended to Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians. In Pakistan, which is a Muslim majority state, for a long time, Ahmadis have been persecuted, even though they are a subset of Islam. There is no provision to protect atheists who may also be persecuted for their religious views in these countries. Neither is there any protection for Jews or even for Muslims like, say, author Taslima Nasreen, who has certain views that leads to her persecution by her fellow religionists. Why are Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Nepal not included? These are all our neighboring countries. These are all countries from which we have seen significant migration and refugee movement. Now, is it because Muslims are not a majority in these countries, and therefore the argument that we are protecting religious minorities would require the inclusion of Muslims if these countries were included?
The Citizenship Amendment Bill, in my view, is unconstitutional for two reasons. First, it discriminates against people on the basis of religion. And two, it discriminates against refugees on the basis of the country of origin. Under our constitution, both of these are violations of Article 14, which guarantee equal protection of laws to everyone. A reasonable classification means that it's not just any classification that they can make will fly. The classification should have to do with the purpose of the bill, and it should be something which is not per se unconstitutional in and of itself. So you can't, for example, make a classification between red-headed people and black-haired people for the purposes of post of a teacher, because it doesn't really matter what the color of your hair is for the purposes of teaching. Likewise, if you are suffering from religious persecution, it should not matter from which religion you're following or from which country you're coming from for the purposes of granting citizenship. The principle of citizenship in India has always been that it is available equally and without any discrimination on the basis of religion, race, caste, ethnicity, and so on. And this bill introduces a religious test to citizenship, which goes fundamentally against the basic structure of basic features of our constitution, both secularism and non-discrimination.
All right, as we mentioned, only one lawyer, one prominent legal expert who we spoke to actually spoke in support of the bill. That was the Supreme Court advocate Rakesh Dwivedi. Let's listen.
As far as constitutionality is concerned, I don't think that this bill can be said to be unconstitutional. So all classification is not barred. The only twin requirement is that classification should be rational, reasonable, and it should be having a nexus with the objective for which you are. As I see, the thrust of this bill is to protect the minorities who are living in these three countries. So A, the focus is on these three countries, not the rest of the world, and B, the focus is on the minorities which are in these countries. Politically, one may think that, even Baluchis suffer persecution at the hands of the other majority sections of the Muslims, or the Shias suffer at the hand of Sunnis. So there are so many other kinds of persecutions which may be happening in these countries. But it's not incumbent upon India to take note of all persecutions.
Also, we spoke to Justice Venkatachalaya, former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He took a somewhat nuanced view. He said the bill is not an inarguable or an unarguable proposition. He said there are strong arguments on both sides. He says that Article 14 recognizes reasonable classification, and the government could argue that religious minorities who suffer at the hands of theocratic states constitute a class by themselves. But it will be on the government, the onus will be on the government to prove reasonableness of the classification. Also, we just want to put on screen for you a number of those that we did contact but either didn't respond to us or said that they still hadn't formulated a view or an opinion that they wanted to share with us. We are not going to list all the names, but it ranged from former Chief Justices of the Supreme Court like Justice Lodha, also Supreme Court judges like Justice Ravindran, to top legal minds like Fali Nariman, Harish Salve, Mukul Rohatgi, Ashok Desai, and so on. All right, joining us tonight on the show, we have with us Yogendra Yadav, National President, Swaraj India, R.M.R. Sundaram, Senior Lawyer, Supreme Court, and KTS Tulsi, Rajya Sabha MP, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of the Congress Party, joining us on the show. Also, apologies to our viewers that our selection of voices has turned out to be all male. It's been somewhat of a manel, and so it is with our panel tonight, but that is not in any way to suggest that we don't attempt to have greater diversity on our programming. But let me just start with you, Yogendra Yadav, that our exercise, we are again not saying this is scientific in any way, and thank you for patiently hearing it out, was to try to get away from this wider debate over whether this bill violates the idea of India or not, but just look at it from the legal constitutional point of view. And we have to say that a majority of those we spoke to felt clearly that it didn't. Yogendra.
Srinivasan, to my mind, it's an open and shut case. Yes, I understand there are some legal minds who don't quite think so, but this is quite an open and shut case because it violates Article 14, it violates the preamble to the Indian Constitution, and it violates the basic structure of Indian Constitution, namely secularism. Whether something is a reasonable classification or not, as someone has pointed out, I don't need to rehearse the arguments which have been made earlier. First of all, why these three countries? Give me a reason. You as a, so just look at it. BJP is suddenly so concerned about minorities and picks only those three countries which happen to be Muslim majority. Are these the only three theocratic countries, countries which have state religion? No, sir. Sri Lanka, for all practical purposes, has Buddhism as state religion, and for the period for which it applied, Nepal was for a very long time, for the period covered under this act, a Hindu state. So that's not covered. The second classification is, okay, you have selected these three countries. Why select only the list of minorities that you have mentioned? Are there not other minorities which suffer discrimination on religious grounds? We do know that in Pakistan, Shias, Ahmadiyas do suffer. And are there not other countries where similar minorities suffer? Of course we know that. Right. So, I mean, the whole thing is a sham. The basic idea is to do signaling. And the signaling is Muslims are not welcome in India. That's principally the signal. Okay. That's why it goes against the very spirit of the Constitution. And to my mind, secularism is not an optional thing in this country. We either have a secular India or we have no India at all. So at stake is the very core of India and its future existence.
Okay. R.M. Sundaram, as I said at the outset, that when it does come up before the court, and in all likelihood if the bill goes through, it will face legal challenge. I suppose the judges will not so much be concerned about wider ideas about the idea of India and so on, but just on the legal test. You heard a selection of some of your own peers and contemporaries, as well as those who are part of your fraternity, voice their view. What is your own view, and also do you believe that given, at least amongst the section we spoke to, a very strong opposition to it, that it will, going ahead, face legal rough weather?
Look, the fact of the matter is, I think somewhere along the way we are missing the real point, and I'll tell you why. Okay. On the face of it, as so many people said, it appears to violate Article 14. On the face of it, as Mr. Yogendra Yadav just said, he feels it's an open and shut case that it violates Article 14. The point is, we're missing something here. Okay. There is a political will, which may be what Mr. Yogendra Yadav is afraid of. But we are not talking about political wills or political attacks as to why something is being done. We are talking about the basic constitutionality. Yes. Now the question is, does this make a separate group in itself? Is there a reasonable differentiation? Is there a rational differentiation? This is the question. Now let's understand two things, and we cannot make a mistake on these two.
Yes.
Number one, what has been done is, this is an exemption. These are all illegal immigrants.
Yes.
These are all illegal migrants who ought to be deported as per the law.
Yes.
The law is being amended to say that a certain category of them will be exempted.
Yes.
So you've got to see whether the exemption is reasonable or not. Not whether the question of the original, it's not a question of secularism in that sense. These are all illegal migrants who, as the law stands, have to be sent out. Allow me to finish.
Yes.
There's a bit of a complicated issue. Let me just take another minute.
Yeah.
The question is not whether these people have to be sent out of the country.
Yes.
You're now making an exemption
Yes.
for which you say there are two things. Number one, they were religiously persecuted in their country.
Right.
And they've been here for a certain length of time.
Yes.
Now, when they talk about religious persecution, a reasonable criteria could be that the persecution is meant to be those who are minority there. Don't forget, we are not talking about political persecution here.
Yes.
We are talking about prosecution purely on religious lines.
Yes.
Now, that is one aspect of it. Yes, that is one. Two, this is not a case of seeking political asylum. I heard certain councils say that, look, people might be persecuted in many ways. If you're being persecuted, you might ask for political asylum for a country, which is a totally different issue altogether.
No, that's a different issue.
It will be taken in its own terms on a totally different footing.
But how
that's a different issue. So we are only talking about a religious minority in a different country.
Then, Mr. Sundaram,
has a right to come into this country and get this.
Understood.
Allow me to finish this.
Yes.
That is the point. Now, I'm not saying it's going to succeed, but I'm saying it's not such an open and shut case as what is sought to be made out.
Okay, let me move on.
It is a very arguable case.
Okay.
I'm not saying that it is.
Okay, let me quickly move on. I had a counter question, but I'm running out of time, so I'll go across to KTS Tulsi to get your response very quickly to this, KTS Tulsi. And if you'd like to respond to what Mr. Sundaram said.
You see, hello?
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Tulsi.
It got disconnected, I think.
Mr. Tulsi, we can hear you.
Is it going on?
Yes, it's going on and we can hear you.
I can't hear what I'm saying now, but what I want to say is that there are two facets of Article 14. One is equal, no discrimination on the ground of religion, race, caste, creed, etc., or sex. But the other is everyone, every citizen, every non-citizen is also entitled to equal protection of laws. Equal protection of laws is what will cover the exemption that has been granted. And therefore, this will be completely irrational, it will be completely discriminatory and therefore void. I also feel that Buddhists have been mentioned amongst the persons who will be exempted. But the countries which are mentioned are Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan. What about China? Buddhists come from China. Or Sri Lanka. Those are not mentioned, so it's completely irrational. The manner in which it has been framed, and it just violates not only the Constitution of India but also the idea of India.
Okay, quickly, Yogendra Yadav, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to say two quick things. You said court will look only at the Constitution, not the wider ideas. No, Vasu. We should not forget the doctrine of basic structure of Constitution, which was elaborated by Supreme Court. That was not based on reading of one article or another article. It was based on the spirit of Constitution that will come into play. Number two, Mr. Sundaram is absolutely right. It is about granting exemption to those who are prima facie illegal. But what is the reasonable basis to say that if you are a Tibetan, you will not be granted? If you are a Hindu from Sri Lanka, you won't be granted, but only if you suffer religious discrimination in a Muslim-dominated country will you be granted. This is blatant discrimination. I'm surprised Mr. Sundaram doesn't see that.
I think I have just enough time for a very quick rebuttal by Mr. Sundaram. Mr. Sundaram, why only, if your concern is religious persecution of minorities, why only those countries and those minorities? Why not others?
Now, this is where All right. Now, this is where an argument will definitely come up, and the government will probably try to justify it by saying, on consideration, they have found that the religious persecution today, what they have seen, is in these 3 countries. And if they find that there is religious persecution in other countries and people have also been affected there, they will think of enlarging the ambit of the exemption. That will possibly be the government answer.
Okay.
We can't second guess what will happen.
All right.
But
Okay.
they would say that today, these are the 3 which appeared to them to be the countries which are involved.
All right. We're out of time there. Thank you all, gentlemen, so much.
In that case, why not simply put that in the law itself, religiously discriminated community?
Okay. All right. We'll have to leave it there. We'll have to wait and see whether or not it indeed does get tested in the court, as I'm sure it will, and then what will it be its fate. Thank you all so much for watching Reality Check and joining us on the show.